We're inside today.
I know. I went out this morning without a jacket because I saw the sun shining and I felt duped.
Yeah.
Oh, well.
I didn't plug in the chicken heated water bowls last night, and they were pretty frozen.
Oh, the life of a farmer.
Yeah.
Okay. So your name's Tammy. If you could tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do, and then we'll go from there.
Okay. Well, I'm owner-operator at Wolfe Springs Farm, which is a small market garden here at my house. When I say small, I mean it's like 50 feet by 200 feet. I do CSA shares, and I sell to some local restaurants. And I also work at a farm down the road called Fertile Valley Farm, and that's a beef and pork operation. So I do marketing and sales for the meat, and I manage the vegetable production there as well. And we have a little roadside farm store.
All right. I'm still trying to get my teenager to quiet down because I can still hear him. Okay. So one of the things that I noticed, you have some really innovative things in marketing, and it's not that they're like kind of in your face or out there, but you're doing some pretty interesting things. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, I try to hit social media hot and heavy in the sense that I try to do a posting every day and engage customers in what's going on. Winter, of course, is really hard because there's not a lot going on the farm.
Right.
And the animals are all in the barns, and it's not pretty, and, it's just not like that picturesque pastoral like farm view that people want to see. So I did try to do some cooking classes over the winter, and it didn't get enough following for me to want to continue that in the spring when I'm going to be really busy.
Right.
So I try to rework it or just do it as a video, because one of my missions is really to just like educate my customers or educate future customers, because when people know about their food and where it's coming from, then they're more likely to buy from me.
So that's what caught my eye, was the comparison that you had done with beef.
Oh, yeah.
And in the post that goes along with this, I'll have a link to all your stuff where people can see that tangible comparison. I thought that was really, it was a great visual, I think, to show people.
Yeah, and I might do more of that once the grass is green and the chickens are really eating lots of green stuff. I might do an egg comparison, because that's always like,
That's
the difference.
very eye-catching.
Yeah. So I'm trying to do something visual. And the other thing I have on the horizon is maybe do like a weekly garden walk so people can see how things are coming along before they actually get their food.
Oh, that's kind of neat. Yeah, the process.
Yeah.
You go through. I like that as well. That's a pretty neat idea. So a lot of times I end up asking everyone the same question because I'm always interested in their perspective. And
Right.
the question that I generally ask people is, what do you think agronomy is? And what do you think an agronomist's role is in kind of today's agriculture?
Okay, well, I think agronomy is basically the study of soil and everything that goes along with it. That's kind of like really broad to say study of soil. And then in terms of an agronomist's role in helping farmers would be to determine the health of the soils at each individual farm, and determine what kind of amendments would need to be applied to that soil to create the most healthy plants.
That's actually a really good snapshot of what it is. That's really good. A lot of times I just get blank stares, or people don't know how to pronounce it, or but you're in the field. I think I'm going to find some people that have absolutely nothing to do with agriculture and kind of get their take on it, because that's really where you get the interesting, the interesting responses. So
the man on the street thing.
Yeah, that's pretty good. I couldn't have explained it or said it better. And I do it every day.
Yeah.
So now I turn it over to you and I let you ask me some questions, because I'll be honest with you, that's the best part of my job is
Right.
questions, because it keeps me thinking and it keeps me current as to what issues people have or what's going on. So
Okay.
this is kind of like a selfish exercise for me.
Sorry. Okay, so my first question is going to be about what's your opinion about tilling versus disking versus manual manipulation of the soil, like using a broad fork?
All right. So you want to know, you want to run the gamut between minimal tillage, some tillage, no till,
Right.
feel about all of it.
Yeah.
So I do say opinions are like noses. Everybody has one and none of them are right. Um, you know, my outlook or my take on tillage is that it has to be very specific to your farm, your crop, and your management style. Um, I think we kind of get in these, opinions or these thoughts where one system or one way can be successful for everyone, and that's not the case. There are some crops that do very well with no-till. There are some crops that will not perform as well under a no-till system. There are some crops that can, be successful, and some farming systems that can be very successful with no-till versus tillage. So I think it has to be a farmer's decision, because there's equipment and finances involved, but they need to take into consideration their soil type and the crop that they're growing. And that's my opinion. My family is no-till and has been no-till for 40 years. It works for them. Is it my choice for what they're doing? Probably not. I might not go that route based on their crops, but it works for them and they're very successful.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're willing to take on the management strategies of whatever type of tillage you want to do, that's your choice.
Mm-hmm.
If that makes sense. I'm not trying to be wishy-washy. I'm
Right.
saying that you have to look at it as a per case, per crop, per farmer decision.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting that you say that, because I think between my own farm and the farm that I work at, I get to see and work in a very wide variety of circumstances. So, like for me in my small market garden, which I'm going to even double in size this year, I just got a broad fork. So, I'm going to be doing that method at my house.
Mm-hmm.
Down the road, I do a no-till method with the vegetable gardens, but when it comes to growing the acres of non-GMO feed corn for the animals, there's not really any other way but to till.
Right.
Nobody's going to go out and broad fork 6 acres or, really anything more than an acre.
Right.
You're gonna, and actually I shouldn't say till, he discs it. So we're not even really tilling, but.
Right. So then you kind of fall into that minimal tillage category where
Right.
you're not plowing it, you're not doing some other things. So like I said, it really has to be what a farmer can manage. I always say if it doesn't make sense and you can't afford it, you shouldn't be doing it.
Right.
And if it doesn't make sense and you can't yield a healthy, financially viable crop, you probably shouldn't be doing it. And it has to also encourage health in the soil too. Sometimes soil needs turned over. It needs air and it needs to breathe. So I'm not totally locked into one system, and I'm not opposed to one or the other. You have to manage for whatever decision you've made. So that's my take on that.
Yeah.
I think some people should be no-tilling when they're tilling, and I think some people should be tilling. You know what I mean? I think there's a time and a place for everything.
Right, right.
So,
Yeah. For me, I have to do everything by hand because I don't make enough money to afford equipment. And I don't really want it. My thing personally is like I want to be peaceful and not hear all that noise and, just it's like my meditative time to be out there pulling weeds and hoeing and all that stuff.
right. So you don't want to be like my dad and I were when I was growing up on the farm, and we're screaming at each other, and the tractor isn't working, and the hydraulics went out, and no, we made it through. We actually fought more baling hay than we did really anything else. But yeah, you want that nice. I totally get it.
Yeah.
But there is a place for heavier equipment and things like that. So, like I said,
I think anytime we're talking about feeding animals or growing anything on a larger scale,
yeah,
there's not really any other way to do it.
right. And it's going to take all of you to feed us.
Yeah.
That's what I always say. It's going to take a lot of different types of agriculture. It's going to take a lot of different types of farmers. There's a lot of us to eat. And actually, I read a study recently that said we are producing enough food in the world, we just can't distribute it.
Yes, and waste. So
Yeah,
whenever I hear the arguments about like, oh, we need GMO crops and we need this and that because, and we need to be able to spray and do all this stuff to create more food. It's not the amount of food.
yeah, it's how are we getting it to people, which that's a whole another question.
Right.
That's a whole nother day's debate right there.
I know. And the amount of waste, it's like whenever we go to a restaurant, which isn't very often, I will take home everything, including the garnish.
Yeah.
Because I'll feed it to the chickens or something. Like I do not want any food to go into the trash.
No, I'm the one eating the parsley and the cilantro, like, because it's there for a reason, right? You should be eating it. That's what I always say. So I'm eating the garnish myself. Forget the chickens. Okay, so what's another question? This is pretty good. I like this.
Okay, so I guess another question I have is, what is the importance of micronutrients in the soil? Usually when, especially I think large scale farming is done, you really just talk about NP and K and, oh, let's just dump a bunch of nitrogen because we know that makes the plants grow. And we're not really concerned about the micronutrients that, could also be having an effect on plant diseases or plant health.
Well, you just said it. Micronutrients play a huge role in plant health. And the healthier the plant, the less desirable it is for insects and pests. And then the less of a chance that they'll get they're less prone to disease. So they definitely play a huge role in that. I have growers that are very attuned and very keen on micronutrients for quality and taste reasons. I have growers that will grow very specific to sulfur because of its flavor component. So there you have quality of the fruit or whatever you're growing, vegetable. You have taste involved, and then you have health as far as, like you said, its immunity and its being less desirable to the insects. But micronutrients also aid in reproductive health with a plant. So then that leads you into fruiting and flowering and really the end game of what we're trying to achieve with a plant. So they play very critical roles. The challenge I see is two things with them. First of all, they're needed in such a small amount. And the second thing is nobody really agrees on that amount. There's not a lot of information or research out there as to say what exactly the level of boron should be. We have some ranges and we have some guides we can go by, but knowing those exact numbers, not a lot of people agree on them. So I think that's the challenge, is that there's just not enough kind of hard, fast information about them. So it
Right.
kind of leaves things up in the air.
And it's harder to amend them as well. Like if you were deficient on one specific micronutrient, it's hard to go out and be like, well, I just need to put zinc in the soil.
In some regards it is, and in some regards it isn't, because they have made huge strides in being able to get very specific nutrients to a plant. So the challenge becomes, is it financially a wise choice? Are you going to see return on your investment if you spray for that specific nutrients? That's where I have a challenge with growers is, and I don't blame them, because this stuff gets really expensive. So that return factor, is it really financially smart enough for them to do it? There are a lot of products out on the market where you can kind of hone in and be very specific for a nutrient. It's just the money involved and the time, because your time is money.
Right. Yeah, I've just been using Epsom salt, which I've heard can help with that. But it's very broad. It's like a kind of a broad range.
Well, it's magnesium sulfate, so it is very specific. I think it is a good option in some cases, but you're not going to get some of the other micronutrients that you might need. So if you're deficient in magnesium, that's a great one. But like I said, to use it all the time, I don't know if I would necessarily do that. I tend to be very judicious with things, though. I always err on the side of less than I do more.
Right.
In some cases, that's come to bite me in the back end, because really getting that right amount is critical and crucial. But I do think you can see a quick response with something like that, but it's not going to cover the whole gamut. If you want a broad spectrum micronutrient package, you're looking at something like kelp.
Okay.
Or some other things. Green sand has a pretty broad spectrum. Azomite has a broad spectrum micronutrient package. So you're kind of looking at those things that run the gamut of micronutrients.
Okay.
So, and kelp is probably one of my go-tos. If you've hung around me for 5 minutes, you've heard about kelp at least once.
Okay.
And there are a couple other things I like too. It's just those are pretty available and they're more cost effective than some of the other ones. But there's some other, I can always picture the bottle that they come in or the package, but I always forget the names. So I have a cheat sheet with a whole bunch of names, but yeah, so there are some other options to get micronutrients.
All right, I'll have to check that out.
Yeah.
And then I guess like my last question would be sort of talking about how to know what nutrients to put in. Obviously, you do soil testing. That can get pretty expensive, especially on the micronutrient level. And in my setup, I do beds. So right now I have 13 50-foot long beds, and I'm going to be doubling that this year. Can I just take a soil sample, like general, or I don't have to do a soil sample for each individual bed, right?
No. So this is how and matter of fact, I just had someone say, oh, it'd be ridiculous for me to take a soil sample of all my raised beds. I wouldn't be able to get an accurate picture. In some regard, they're right, but actually I beg to differ with that. And I would give you 2 options for taking soil tests. First is, depending on how many beds you have and what all you're planting, you could take a composite sample. So take a few samples from each bed, put it together in a bucket, mix it really well, and send that off as your sample. Is it totally accurate? No. Is it the best picture? It could be, it couldn't be, but at least gives you somewhere to start. Another option is to break your beds down into like crop groups. So where you're putting brassicas, where you're putting your tomatoes, peppers, and other things. So kind of break them down by crop and take samples that way. So that way you're not taking, 30, 40 samples of all your beds, but you're at least breaking it down by crop, because your fertility program really should be based off of your soils, but it should be based off your crop as well.
Right.
So that kind of makes it easier. And I think you can get on a nice rotation with it too. Because do you have to take a soil sample every year? No. Should you? It depends on your management style and how you're growing. So I think you can get on a good rotation like that.
Okay.
And that makes it a little more financially able to handle.
Yeah. Okay.
And really, micronutrients are not that much more expensive, especially if you pick a lab that has a package that has them somewhat included.
Okay.
And I always stress that, I think it's great people get a soil test, but don't miss out on everything, because really you're costing yourself a little more money in the long run. So micronutrients are very important to look at.
Okay.
So, any more questions?
No, that's it.
Well, Tammy, this has been a lot of fun. I appreciate you taking time out of your day to do this, and we're going to have some links up on the website to all your information and some information we talked about today.
Great. That's excellent.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, you can record it, and then if it doesn't turn out, you can delete it.
Yeah. This is an afterthought.
Okay.
With all of the advocacy and all the groups that are out there promoting and talking about agriculture and, the buy fresh, buy local, I just see a lot of advocacy. I don't even pronounce it correctly. And I know there's another one at AG. I can't even pronounce this stuff correctly. But with all of that out there, why is there still such a disconnect between the farmer and the consumer?
I'm still trying to figure that out myself, to be honest. I think part of it is convenience. It's not very convenient to come to the farm if and I always tell people, I'm like, we're 7 minutes from town. It is not really out of the way. Okay, 7 minutes from town.
Longer to get to the grocery store.
Well, I'm saying if you're already in town for something else.
But do you see what I'm saying? I'm in town, and it takes me longer to get to the grocery store.
Yeah. So, and then the other thing is, fear of not, sometimes you go to these little farm stands or whatever, and you go with an expectation to buy certain things, and those things aren't there, because especially with small farms, we're not picking bushels of tomatoes, and so we might only have a couple bags of tomatoes sitting out, and they might be gone. And then people get upset. Well, I came to the farm just for that, and it ruined my whole day, and I'm never coming back.
So it's kind of like that grocery store mentality. Like,
yes.
Every time I go to the grocery store, they're going to have exactly what I want when I want it.
Instead of people going to the farm, buying what's available, and then making a recipe based on availability, they're going to the grocery store with a recipe in mind already. So I don't know how to change that mentality, but I think that's the biggest hang up is planning before shopping.
But that's kind of been pounded into people's heads.
Oh, it has, especially in, families where both parents are working or, both partners are working. They feel like they don't have time to do it any other way.
Right.
Commercials out there are all geared towards, oh, you're so important because you work so much that we're going to prepare food for you. And it's like the amount of money that you spend per pound on prepared foods is
Oh, I
unbelievable.
can, yeah.
But yeah, it's like that's why I tried to do some of my cooking classes because I had a lot of customers who were like, "Well, I don't know how to cook this. I don't know how to do that. What do you do?" People didn't know how to cook a whole chicken, or oh, that's an interesting vegetable. How do you use that?
So it's kind of re-educating.
Yes, yes. So I don't know how we go about trying to get people to shop locally and seasonally and and then do their meal planning based on what the farm has. And that's a little bit like the CSA model, which is actually kind of popular. Um, that's really what I'm focusing on with my market garden is the CSA shares. Then people do have to wait and see what they get in their box,
Right.
meal plan based on that. Um, but yeah,
So it's kind of changing it step by step.
it is. It is. And I also like to target the restaurants that are really farm to table because that makes people feel really good. Like, oh, I'm going to go to this farm to table restaurant. That means I'm supporting local farmers. And if that's their way of supporting us, that's fine with me.
Right. Actually, that's a very good way to do it
Yeah,
because everybody's kind of getting a little more bang for their buck.
right.
You're able to sell at a higher volume,
But for a lower price. So,
unfortunately, but at least you're moving more volume. It's
hmm
good for the restaurant, and that kind of encourages consumers a little bit then too.
yeah. hmm
Okay. That's an interesting. Thank you for that. I'm going to stop recording.